So welcome, everyone. My name is Lara Friedman. I am the president of the Foundation for Middle East Peace. We are very, very pleased to see you here today, and thank you to MEI, as always, for hosting us. If you haven't gotten food yet, I'd urge you to do that soon, because I think it's disappearing. We are here today for a really timely event. We are very, very happy to be hosting our friends from OneVoice and Zimam, who are going to talk about the situation on the ground. There's a lot of discussion here in Washington that focuses on the political track. We had Abu Mazen yesterday at the UNSC and the discussion around that. There's a different discussion that needs to be had about what's happening on the ground from the perspective of the people living under occupation. So that's what we're going to have today. We're very privileged to have here with us four speakers, two from the ground, two from Washington, who are going to act as respondents. Or I think actually Khaled may start us off. I'm not going to read you their bios. You got those by email. They are all impressive. We are very, very pleased to host this, and I'm going to hand this off straight away to my colleague here from OneVoice, who will lead this discussion. So thank you. And he is going to lead the discussion for 45 minutes or so, and then we'll open it up for Q&A.
Yep. Thank you, Lara, and thanks everyone for coming. And my thanks are to the Middle East Institute, as well as to the Foundation for Middle East Peace, for supporting our efforts towards ending the conflict and the occupation and establishing a better future. So we're going to try to make this event as unconventional as possible. One of the things is that we're not going to have opening remarks. We're going to dig into the questions. But the other thing is that also we're going to take the first part of the event is going to be an evaluation of what has been going on over those 70 past years of conflict. And then we'll look at the present and then the President Trump declaration. And then finally move into the future and imagining the future. We always talk about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict from the past, and we criticize people. We also regret things and so forth. Now today, I would like us to focus a little bit more on the future. And so if I may start with Khaled, I would like to say, well, the Palestinian people have led plenty of struggle, different types of struggle towards the Israeli occupation. And in '88, the PLO made this massive concession from a Palestinian perspective, over 78% of Palestine for peace. And so if we look back at this journey that the PLO has been kind of leading, what things have they done right? What things have they done wrong? What things could they have done differently, if you may?
Easy.
Wow, how long is this panel?
I know, right? You have like 2 minutes and a half. No, more than that.
Well, right off the bat, I would say one of the things that they did pretty well was having a vision, a strategic vision for the Palestinian people, which is something that is notably absent, I would say, at the present. And that vision actually became the basis of the entire diplomatic process on which the peace process was based. So, the PLO started floating the idea of what they used to call a rump state in the West Bank and Gaza in the early 1970s. Of course, it was still very, very contentious within the PLO, and it took some time to establish a modicum of political consensus within the PLO. But that became, the two-state solution became the basis for the entire peace process and is very often nowadays referred to as the only game in town. And it wasn't always so. And so I think that vision, that pragmatism was very important. The other component that I think was important was having the means to establish an internal political consensus. You had the PLO, which was by no means a democratic institution, but certainly was a consensus-based institution and was representative. It included all of the main political factions from the 1970s into the 1980s. It became the singular address for the Palestinian people worldwide. So those are really, I think, the two main contributions that the Palestinian leadership and that Palestinian institutions have made. And I would say the flip side also is true, that is What is mainly lacking now is the political vision, strategic vision. There's been an over-dependence, I would say, on the United States and an American-led peace process, even when it became clear to many others that it wasn't a constructive process. And the other key deficiency is the lack of representativeness and the inability to forge a new political consensus. You have groups, obviously, like Hamas and Islamic Jihad and Palestinian Initiative and others that are outside of the PLO umbrella that has created a lot of problems, obviously, for how Palestinians operate in terms of their legitimacy overseas, but also internally. So I would say those are the two things that they did right and that they did wrong.
Yeah, thank you. So going off of that, Maya, in Palestine, we see the Arab American community as an ally of ours and as an extension of us. How do you think, what role has the Arab American community played in this struggle over the past 30 years, I would say?
Well, thank you again for convening us. It's played, I think, a really important issue, an important role in this, particularly post-1967. When you tell the story of the Arab American community coming of age, particularly politically, it really was the 1967 war that was an awakening of sorts. And I appreciate you framing it as Arab Americans, because I think people sometimes make the mistake of looking at people of country of origin as opposed to Palestine being an issue of defining justice for people across the board from the region, especially in terms of Arab Americans. So we used to talk about, Arab nationalism failed in the region, but there really is a sense of Palestine being a unifying issue for people that hail from 22 different nations here in the U.S. And I would say that of late, it's also increasingly an issue for those who have been here multiple generations. We're roughly 3.7 million Arab Americans in this country. The great majority of us have been here a very long time. It's not recent immigrants. There's often a perception of that case. It's a dynamic community that continues to see the influx of new arrivals. But it is and continues to be a defining issue. And the other thing I would say, which I won't need to get into now, but the way that the Palestinian-Israeli conflict has played out as a domestic issue for us is also something really important and worth noting. We see it on college campuses with regards to free speech. We talk about it in terms of Middle East Studies Association programs. We talk about the treatment of Americans entering Israel and the occupied territories and U.S. passports not being acknowledged or upheld in a way that's respectful. So there's a variety of ways in which the conflict itself, even if you say to yourself, I really don't associate with that foreign policy priority, it has very real domestic implications.
Yeah, true. So one thing I did not say before we start is that I'm going to be playing two roles today. One is moderating this conversation. It's an honor, but the other honor is being a translator for one of my first teachers and mentors, Abdallah, from Palestine. So Abdallah was so engaged in grassroots work that he forgot to learn English. And now I'm going to actually jump direct to Abdallah, and let's see from the grassroots perspective what it looks like. So before Oslo and during Oslo, and NGOs have been around and they've been increasing. What part do you think the Palestinian civil society played over the past 30 or more years? Because nonprofits and civil society has been there earlier.
كمان مرة السؤال في العربي.
شو دور اللي لعبه السيفل سوسايتي الفلسطيني في الصراع وفي سياسيا يعني؟
المؤسسات الأهلية والجمعيات في الوطن.
Civil society back home.
في لها دور رئيسي في رفع الوعي وتمكين المجتمع الأهلي والمجتمع في فلسطين.
Has had the main role in raising awareness and empowering the Palestinian people.
وكان لها دور مكمل في رفع المعنويات للشعب الفلسطيني وتمكينه في أماكن تواجده في القرية وفي المدينة وفي المخيمات من أجل إدراك الواقع اللي احنا عايشين فيه.
And it helped the Palestinian people understand the reality, and they empowered them to stay steadfast in their villages and camps and cities.
وبعض الجمعيات تحولنا إلى أحزاب سياسية أو أحزاب وطنية.
And some of the civil society organizations eventually turned into political parties,
مثل المبادرة مثل
like the Palestinian Initiative.
المؤسسات الأهلية لها دور رئيسي في رفع الوعي عند الشباب الفلسطيني وعند المجتمع الفلسطيني سياسيا ومجتمعيا.
I would say the main thing is that they played a main role in raising awareness about, the different issues that the Palestinian society is facing.
لكن بعد أوسلو شفنا بعض الجمعيات وبعض المؤسسات وبعض الحركات بيشتغلوا سياسي أو بيحاولوا يمارسوا دور سياسي إنهم يكسروا الفجوة بين القيادة السياسية وبين المجتمع الفلسطيني.
So post-Oslo it became more political and they started playing this role of bridging the gap between the leadership and the people.
وخاصة على المجتمع الفلسطيني والمجتمع الإسرائيلي حاولوا بعض الجمعيات مثل OneVoice إنهم يكسروا حاجز الفجوة عدم الفهم الوضع السياسي وشو بودينا وين بودينا الحل السياسي لحل الدولتين.
Yeah, so OneVoice used to operate in two different offices in parallel, but separately, one in Palestine, one in Israel. And each of those societies, OneVoice used to play this bridge role between the political leadership and the people, and explaining basically through various activities what the political situation means. For instance, the two-state solution, what that means and that requires.
بعض المؤسسات كانت في عندها صعوبات وما زالت موجودة صعوبات موجودة لليوم.
There are a lot of difficulties that the civil society is facing.
أحياناً بتقبلهاش المجتمع وبنحاول من خلال ورشات العمل من خلال الورشات التعريفية نبين دورهم وشو ممكن يعملوا وشو ممكن يرفعوا وعي الناس في كسر الفجوة بين يعني القيادة السياسية وبين المجتمع الفلسطيني.
Some civil society organizations play sensitive roles and sometimes they're not even accepted entirely by the society, but then they keep working and organizing town hall meetings to explain the way they work and then to bridge this gap between the leadership and the people. Thank you. And if I may stay with Abdallah actually for a little bit, just recently the President Trump had his Jerusalem declaration that declaring Jerusalem as the capital of Israel and his intention of moving the embassy to Jerusalem. Did this decision impact the Palestinian street? What kind of impact did this decision have on the Palestinian street? كيف أثر القرار على الشارع الفلسطيني؟
بصراحة هذا قرار يعني كان صعب جدا وخطير وله أبعاد سياسية ومجتمعية يعني بحكي يعني طويلة الأمد.
It was a very difficult and dangerous decision and it has a lot of consequences, societal and otherwise.
مسألة القدس هي مسألة بتهم الجميع دينيا وسياسيا ووطنيا وعلى جميع الأصعد.
Jerusalem is a core issue from different perspectives, nationally, religiously, and from other angles.
هذا القرار يعني كان صعب جدا على المجتمع الفلسطيني بجميع أطيافه.
It was very difficult for the Palestinian people with its various strata to accept it.
ويعني أعتقد أنا إنه حول الصراع إلى حد ما إلى ديني.
And it turned the conflict to a certain extent, to a religious conflict.
بالإضافة إلى بعده الوطني وبعده على الأرض وحدود وكل.
In addition to its other consequences nationally and borders and all those.
وخلق أجواء مشحونة في الأراضي الوطنية الفلسطينية ترفض هذا القرار.
And it created very charged environments in Palestine that rejects the decision.
وفي الحقيقة هذا القرار أضعف أكثر شيء أو أثره المباشر كان على الناس المعتدلين والناس اللي بيآمنوا في الحل السلمي وأنها الحكومة الأمريكية ممكن تكون وسيط في مسألة الصراع.
And honestly, it mainly weakened the moderates in Palestine, those who believed that the American government could play a role in ending the conflict.
في الأراضي الفلسطينية الآن يوجد حالات رفض ومن خلال أنشطة ومظاهرات ومسيرات في جميع المدن الفلسطينية.
There are different activities that reject this decision from protests and otherwise.
بعض الأحيان تتحول إلى عنفية يعني أشكال رفض هذا القرار.
Sometimes those rejection forms become violent.
واحنا خوفنا احنا كمؤسسات اهليه وكعاملين في المجال الشبابي انه يتحول هذا الصراع او هذا المظاهرات والمسيرات إلى عنف على غرار ما صار في الانتفاضة الثانية.
And our fear as civil society is that this anger is going to turn into violence like what happened in the second intifada.
مؤسستنا فاهم هي زي ما القيادة الفلسطينية تدعو لرفض هذا القرار على بطرق بمقاومة لا عنفية.
So our organization, like the Palestinian leadership, we reject this decision, but we also call for the responses to be non-violent. Thank you. And if I may go back to Khaled, off of what Abdallah was saying, we saw a lot of rejection. We saw responses coming from the Arab states, from the UN. And what I want to focus on here is, as disastrous as this decision is and could be, do you think that there are opportunities that we can capitalize on? That not in the decision itself, but maybe it created some opportunities.
I mean, I would go back to the central question of the absence of a Palestinian strategic plan or vision. If this move has any potential, if any good could come out of it, I think it is the potential to spur the Palestinian leadership, or perhaps a new leadership at some point down the road, to adopt a different course of action than the one that they have, which is really one that is, well, you all saw the speech, I think, of President Abbas, and there was not a lot that was new there. Just a call for bringing in more international actors into the peace process. This has been a standard Palestinian demand, really, for many years. So I think if there's any good that can come out of it, it's maybe to generate some pressure from the Palestinians themselves toward their leadership to sort of put their house in order internally, not only in terms of a strategy, but also in terms of fixing the disastrous division that has paralyzed Palestinian politics, and that, frankly, is also exacerbating a horrific humanitarian crisis in Gaza. The Palestinian leadership is part of the problem. It's not simply an Egyptian-Israeli blockade. It is also a Palestinian Authority responsibility in that regard. So the hope is that Palestinians themselves might spur some change on the part of their leadership.
Sure. Yeah. And for you, Maya, how did this decision impact the Arab American community? But also, has there been responses, major or minor, to that?
Sure. Let me answer it this way. I think that it impacts Arab Americans like it did, I think, everybody all over the world, which was a bit of shock that it was being done the way that it was done, both in terms of we made this major announcement, then we said, don't worry, it doesn't really mean anything. And so there was a lot of sort of perplexed perspectives across the board. But I think to follow up on Khaled's point, though, is that the other case that could potentially be made is that we've ripped the Band-Aid off completely, right? Like this part of the Palestinian process and the role that they've played in this has been that the United States was this broker, right, during this peace process. And I've never even, I mean, my goals are not as lofty as saying balanced perspective or neutral. It was just credible, that we would be a credible broker in this process. And I think that there are many reasons for those who have watched this issue closely. We're aware that that hasn't been the case. We've seen more subsequent announcements, and I think Jerusalem was sort of the final one that we're done. There's no attempt anymore at pretending to even be a credible voice for a nonviolent solution to this conflict. So I think while it's difficult for me to say that, because I also think that's really counter to the United States, my country's national security interests long term, but I do think that one can make the case that there's a potential in that level of sort of clarity moving forward. I don't think it's one that works in our interest, though, and I find that highly problematic.
It's very interesting. Thank you. Yeah. And so going back to you, Abdallah, we can talk about the past and the present a lot and criticize and learn. The fact remains that Palestine is under occupation, and that this needs to change. How do you, from a civil society perspective, see the way forward? كيف أنت يعني هسا يعني بنضل نحكي إحنا إنه ننتقد الماضي ونتعلم منه، بس الحقيقة تبقى إنه إحنا لساتنا تحت الاحتلال، كيف أنت بتشوف الطريق لقدام؟
قرار الرئيس الأمريكي في نقل السفارة رغم خطورته لازم إحنا ما نستسلم لهذا القرار.
Despite the danger of the Trump declaration decision, we should not give up.
ولازم من خلال رفضنا لهذا القرار انه نحاول نخلق فرص من اجل البناء عليها وبناء حركة رافضة من اجل انهاء الاحتلال.
And through our rejection, through our rejection for the Trump declaration, we need to create a movement that is going to pressure and push towards ending the occupation.
أنا يعني بدي أرجع لامبارح اللي صار في اليوان كان مهم جدا.
I'm going to go back to yesterday and the speech that Khaled cited. President Abbas spoke at the UN. It was very important.
أعتقد لأول مرة فلسطينيا يتم تقديم مبادرة وطنية فلسطينية من أجل إنهاء الصراع وإنهاء الاحتلال.
For the first time, Palestinians are offering an initiative for ending the conflict and ending the occupation.
دائما نحن بنتلقى مبادرات ونتعامل معها بحكم الواقع وبحكم يعني احيانا المجاملات من اجل التساوق معها، بس هاي المره في عندنا فلسطينيا مبادره تستحق منا فلسطينيا العمل والتشبث بها وتسويقها للعالم وحتى للاسرائيليين.
Usually we receive those initiatives and we react to them in different ways. But this time around, we have an important initiative from Palestine that we should hold on to, promote to the world, and push forward.
ويجب الاعتماد على المنظمات الأهلية والحركات الشعبية وحتى التنظيمات الفلسطينية من أجل تسويقها ورفع سقفها من أجل إنهاء الاحتلال.
And the civil society as well as the Palestinian political parties should adopt it and work on it towards ending the occupation. Thank you. Yeah. So Khaled, again, I know you were an advisor at one point to the PA in Ramallah and during negotiations time, but it was all different times. Now, if you were to go back and become an advisor to President Abbas or to the Palestinian leadership, what would your word of advice be to them?
Fix your own house first. It's really quite that simple. You know, I don't really see any possibility for a Palestinian plan to take off in the midst of Palestinian division, political stagnation, dysfunction, humanitarian crisis, a lack of legitimacy, endless fiscal problems, even in the West Bank, growing authoritarianism. I don't see that as an environment in which a cohesive Palestinian or effective Palestinian political strategy can produce anything. So if there is any hope for salvaging what is left of a vision of two states or an independent Palestinian state of some sort, then it has to begin, I think, by fixing some of the problems at home and then using a much more effective Palestinian polity that is cohesive as a springboard toward international action or regional action. But I don't see how any of those tracks can be effective when, you know, given the state of the Palestinian house.
Yeah, that's true. Maya, in terms of the Arab American community, I know it's very important, like what Khaled is talking about is a core. But it's also very important for us to receive the support from the Arab American community that the Palestinian society sees not only as an ally, that, like I said before, but also having more tools than we do have back at home, whether it's, like you said, in you know, formatting the American foreign policy differently, you know, like having Americans become a better mediator in the conflict. So do you have, like, is there a strategy for the Arab American community that they'll follow and both like responding to the Trump declaration, but also moving forward, because it's time to start doing action as opposed to reaction.
Sure. I would argue that the post-Oslo process was very impactful for the way this issue was addressed in the United States. It may have had almost no impact at all in the region, and it was a sort of complete failure as a process, but it did have significant change in terms of the way that Arab Americans and members of the American Jewish community approached this issue. So at a time back before Oslo, there really was this Arab side and this Jewish side, and we all played it out, and everybody talked about power imbalance, sort of similar to the way you might talk about Palestinian-Israeli power imbalance. I think post-Oslo, there's obviously been a significant shift in that the groups came together around values and positions on issues as opposed to Arab Americans or American Jews that way. And I think that's an important point. There has been a tremendous shift in terms of who speaks to the American Jewish community on this issue, with the addition of Americans for Peace Now and J Street and JVP and others. It's no longer this sort of AIPAC is in the room and that's it. In terms of the Arab American community, on the flip side of that is that, you know, we're a large community with a lot of issues, though. So we've not had the benefit of being able to sort of single laser focus on this issue in a way that could potentially have us being more impactful. It's been important, and it's been important for a long time, but even in a this most recent presidential election, the amount of domestic issues, as you can all imagine, that we're dealing with are really extraordinary. So the amount of time that's spent on the Muslim refugee ban versus the amount of time that you're dealing with the post-Jerusalem announcement. Those are some of the things that our community in particular has had to sort of weigh. But having said that, I would point out, sort of different than just the Arab American hat, is Americans understand this differently. There's much made about the partisan divide on this issue as if it just happened. This has been a progression. It's been happening for a long time. And it has a lot to do with what is a generational gap on this issue as well. You see it on college campuses across the country. I think the cat is out of the bag. You cannot deny that Palestinians are a people deserving of human rights anymore. To Americans, and I would say full stop. Those who are trying to push back on that are actually offering a counter narrative. Frankly, that's the defensive position at this point. Has it translated to members of Congress or the Trump administration? No, but I would argue that there are very real impact for people who continue to take positions that are counter to both where the American public is, as well as, I would argue, and I sound like a broken record on this, but as well as our own national security interests. We are isolated in the world on this, and I don't think that's a good thing.
Yeah, thank you. So when speaking about strategies, we need to understand the reality on the ground. And we hear a lot of people, political scientists and experts on this issue, point out to this new generation in Palestine that was born and also grew up in the post-war period, what they call, like after the separation wall was built. And those who are people do not remember necessarily the Second Intifada, did not live before it to see what reality was like. So the only thing they know is the manifestations of the occupation. You can see settlements, checkpoints, and jeeps and soldiers, and that's it. Where do you think we should take those people, like this new generation? I feel like you look at statistics and you see a vast number of Palestinians are unaffiliated. So where do we go from there? تطلع على الجيل اللي انولد بعد الجدار العنصري وبتشوف انه هذول الناس اولا يعني غير منتسبين لاحزاب سياسيه وما عاشوش الانتفاضه الثانيه وما بيعرفوش شيء غير المستوطنات اللي حوالين هذول الناس. وين يعني كيف بدنا نقود هذول الناس لطريق افضل؟
يعني وضع هذول الشباب هو خلينا نحكي الأسوأ في الشارع الفلسطيني.
I would say that the situation of those youth is the worst in the Palestinian street, among the Palestinian public.
هذول يعني أولاد الانتفاضة الأولى، يعني أولادهم وما عاشوش ما شافوش الإسرائيلي كمحتل بشكل، ما شافوش إلا كمحتل، ما شافوش إلا كإجراءات احتلال، كشكل احتلال من مستوطنات، من حواجز، من جدار، من قمع، من كل هاي المسائل اللي هي بس بتمثل الاحتلال.
They only lived after the second Intifada, so and the wall was built, so they did not see the Israelis except as occupiers, as soldiers and people at checkpoints and settlers and all that.
وللأسف ما في برامج كفاية فهم تحتوي هاي الأطفال من تنظيماتنا الفلسطينية أو من المؤسسات المجتمع الأهلي اللي يوعوهم سياسيا بما يكفي ويكونوا عندهم هم ضمن المنظومة الوطنية.
So sadly, there isn't enough programming that would adopt those kids or those youth, whether it's the Palestinian political parties or the civil society organization, which would raise their awareness and talk politics to them.
وبنشوف احنا ردات فعل هاي الشباب موجودة على الأرض، بنشوفهم أحيانا بيهجموا، يعني واحد بيحمل سكينة وبيهجم على جندي يعني كله سلاح وكله متدرب.
Sometimes we saw some of their actions in stabbings, for instance, approaching a soldier who's fully armed and trained.
بدهم يعبروا عن حالة الرفض اللي عندهم، أحيانا هذا طريقة تعبيرهم، يعني أحيانا من دون عقل، من دون تفكير بصيروا يتصرفوا تصرفات أحيانا مش معقولة بتكون.
And irrationally, without thinking, they use such a method to express their rejection and their anger.
أحيانا بنخرطوا في المسيرات وفي المظاهرات بيكونوا فعالين، يعني بيكونوا في مقدمة المظاهرات هذول الشباب الصغار.
They also participate in a lot of protests and they're always leading. They're in the front.
يعني احنا زي مؤسستنا، زي بعض المؤسسات، زي بعض التنظيمات الفلسطينية زي فتح، فهم بيحاولوا انهم ينظموهم من خلال المقاومة اللا شعبية، المقاومة اللا عنفية والمقاومة الشعبية.
In my organization and many other organizations, including political parties like Fatah, we try to include them in our programming in non-violent resistance.
بس هذول الشباب المراهقين بحاجة لبرامج أكثر، بحاجة لاهتمام أكبر، وفي خطورة إذا هذول فقدوا الأمل بشكل كبير، يعني بشكل مباشر.
The one thing is that there needs to be a lot more attention paid to them. They need a lot more programming and education, and it would be really dangerous if they lose hope completely.
عمر بنتي أنا 5 سنين ونص، بوديها على المدرسة بتمرق من منطقة ل A B C كل يوم.
My daughter is 5.5, and every day we drive to school, and she goes from area A to B to C.
بتشوف جنود فلسطينية وجنود إسرائيلية.
She sees Palestinian police and she sees Israeli soldiers.
بنتي عمرها 5 سنين ونص عايشة احتلال زي ما أنا عشته، زي ما أبوي عاشه، زي ما سيدي عاشه.
And she's 5.5 now, and she lives the occupation the same way I lived it, my grandpa lived it, my father lived it.
واقع الاحتلال فيش حدا بيقبله، وكل العالم بدهم يرفضوه، وكل المجتمع بيرفضه.
No one accepts or will accept the occupation. Everybody rejects it.
لكن أحيانا الآلية والأدوات اللي بنستخدمها يعني لازم تكون مدروسة ومعقولة، ويقودها تنظيمات أو يقودها قيادات قادرة على الاستفادة منها وبناء عليها استراتيجيات.
But also the way we reject the occupation that no one accepts need to be sane and practical and built on in a strategic way.
بالإضافة إلى كمان إحنا بحاجة فلسطينيا إن إحنا نأثر على الشارع الإسرائيلي ونأثر على المجتمع الإسرائيلي من خلال برامج وأنشطة.
We also, as Palestinians, need to impact the Israeli street.
لأنه زي ما بنشوف إلى حد ما حكومة مستوطنين موجودة على رأس الهرم الإسرائيلي.
Because their government, to a certain extent, is a government of settlers.
وهذا يعني لازم العمل عليه بشكل مباشر مع المجتمع الإسرائيلي لإعادة صياغته من خلال الانتخابات وقبل الانتخابات، من أجل خروج في قيادة يعني تكون إلى حد ما معتدلة، تؤمن بالسلام وتؤمن بإنهاء الصراع وتؤمن بإنهاء الاحتلال.
This needs to be reshaped in cooperation with the Israeli society to produce a leadership on their side that believes in peace and that believes in ending the occupation and ending the conflict.
وبدي ارجع على المبادرة الفلسطينية اللي قدمها سيادة الرئيس امبارح.
I want to go back to the Palestinian initiative that our president offered yesterday.
لازم المؤسسات الأهلية والوطنية بالإضافة للحركات الفصائل الوطنية الفلسطينية المعتدلة إنها تعمل على نقل هاي المبادرة إلى المجتمع الإسرائيلي.
So I would call on the organizations, the civil society, and the political parties to basically deliver the message of this initiative to the Israeli society. Great. If the panel does not have any other comments, I would love to open it to the audience for questions. It's your turn. Here, please.
So my name is Jerome Siegel. I'm the president of the Jewish Peace Lobby.
Can we also keep our questions short and brief so we can, take as many as possible and less comments?
My name is Jerome Siegel, president of the Jewish Peace Lobby, which is essentially J Street when Arafat was in Tunis. And my question is primarily directed to you, Mr. Shtaya. So Maya mentioned AIPAC and new voices in the Jewish community and so on, but it seems to me that the power dynamics remain the same, basically because nobody has ever challenged an AIPAC member of Congress successfully. In fact, no one has even run against them on one of these issues until now. So Ben Cardin is AIPAC's water boy in the Senate, and he's being challenged in Maryland, amazingly by someone by coincidence who has the same name that I do. And I want to ask the question, what happens if this AIPAC candidate actually was to lose the nomination for Senate in Maryland? Would it make a big difference?
Yeah. So I'm not American. I don't know what you're talking about, and I'm also not a panelist. So if anybody wants to respond to this question from the panel, please. Or otherwise, sorry, I apologize. I came here to study 3 years ago. I happen to be here until now. Going back to my country.
I am an American. Here's how I would note that. First of all, I think there's a bit of the AIPAC myth that we play out when we adopt that narrative completely. And I don't mean to just fixate on AIPAC, but the pro-Israel lobby in particular. There were examples that were cited of members of Congress who lost because of their opposition to positions that the extreme pro-Israel right had requested. And the reality is some of those districts were redrawn in such a way that that didn't necessarily play out, but we feed into this sort of disparity of power in a way that I think we have to be more careful about. And I would offer you an alternative model, which is that there have been members of Congress who have been very, I would cite one in particular, which we should talk about because of the subject matter that we're addressing today. But Betty McCollum sent a letter to AIPAC telling them that they were not welcome in her office until they had apologized to her chief of staff because of the way that he was treated. And she released that letter and made it public. And we all were told, oh boy, this is the end of Betty McCollum, this is horrible. Well, Betty McCollum, after winning re-election, joined the Appropriations Committee. So there are, I think, many examples, and I think it's important for us to talk about it in terms of the role she continues to play among many members of Congress. She has a legislation now looking at the issue of U.S. dollars being used specifically in the one would argue illegal treatment of Palestinian children living under occupation, military courts and such. So I think it would be dramatic if somebody unseated Ben Cardin. I'm a realist. But at the same time, I would caution us to sort of think about that sort of dichotomy differently sometimes as well.
Thank you. Gentleman, the white back.
Could the gentleman from Brookings... Could the gentleman from Brookings give practical steps as to how the Palestinians can get their house in order? There certainly has seemingly been many efforts. They don't seem to have worked. So instead of just talking platitudes, what exactly should they do that is feasible and workable to achieve what you're suggesting is necessary?
Well, there are a few things. I think the first thing, really, and the most basic step is to solidify the reconciliation process internally that is happening. Not because the two groups love each other, but in order to allow the PA to return to Gaza, in order to allow some sort of normalization of life, to open the borders, to avert a disastrous humanitarian crisis. Actually, there's already a humanitarian crisis, but to avert an explosion out of Gaza as a result, and we've seen this recurring violence coming out of Gaza. So that's a basic step that can be taken. There are technical issues regarding Hamas weapons and salaries for civil servants in Gaza. All of them, I think, are resolvable. It's a question of political will on the part of the two main factions. But that's the beginning step. That's a minimal step. There are other steps: reforming the PA, reforming the PLO, bringing groups that are not inside the PLO into giving them membership in the Palestine National Council and eventually the executive committee of the PLO, to make the PLO a truly representative body. Right now, there aren't the incentives for this leadership to do that. There's division within Fatah, within the ruling party. Excuse me. And of course, ruling parties don't generally like to share power. They don't unilaterally surrender power. So there are lots of things that they can do and that have been pointed out by. You don't even need the Brookings Institution. They've been pointed out by Palestinian activists and academicians in Palestine who know far better than I exactly what's needed to reform Palestinian politics, but those steps aren't being taken.
Howard?
Thank you. I was going to ask a question like that, and you just gave me the opportunity to sort of ask a follow-up. With all the effort that's been put in by the donor community, the U.S., the Europeans, to focus on Palestinian governance, to focus on improved efficiency, to build infrastructure, to build the private sector for at least 20, 25 years now, we haven't seen the Palestinian house fall into order. So I'll push you even further on how practically can this happen. And secondly, to ask, doesn't this take Israel off the hook? I mean, one of the reasons, in my opinion, that we're in the situation we're in is because for the past 12 years or so, Abbas has gotten almost nothing from the Israelis in return for security cooperation, in return for pressing a nonviolent agenda. He hasn't gotten access and movement improved. He hasn't gotten anything relaxed in the Paris protocols. Palestinians are stuck with an Oslo Accord that's, to quote our president, one of the worst deals ever. And so how do you actually get them to have the support, them, the Palestinians, to have the political credibility really to do this without Israel giving something and without figuring out how to work with the internationals better?
If I may add to this, or even separately, if Howard doesn't want me to, change his question, we could advise the Palestinian people. I don't know if this is something as I mentioned in my question, but there's the leadership and there's the people, and we can see those increasing numbers of unaffiliated Palestinians. And like Abdallah mentioned, it seems to be going in a really weird, unpredictable or predictable direction.
First, Howard's point. In a way, I think the second part of your question answered the first part. Why? Why? You're absolutely right that he hasn't gotten anything, not just from the Israelis, but from the peace process. And it's because the peace process has been primarily geared, and this includes the whole donor apparatus, has been geared toward Israeli priorities and preferences. And so governance was important to the extent that it implicated directly Israeli interests like security. And so that's why you have something like 38% of the PA's budget, which is astronomical by any governance standard anywhere in the world, to devote to security. Something like, that proportion of the budget to be devoted to security obviously reflects the priorities of the peace process and the Israelis and the American sense of what Israeli priorities are. And that has to do with the power imbalance. The power imbalance not only between the two parties, but the imbalance, the political imbalance that exists in terms of which side influences American priorities and preferences. And that's been the fundamental problem with this process, is the donors basically defer to American leadership, which to a great extent defers to Israeli priorities. So you had the great success of the state building project, and it was called a great success because it did clean up Palestinian finances, it did lead to less corruption, and those were very important, but it did it in an environment in which there was no functioning parliament, in which 40% of the population that lived in the occupied territories was not a part of, was not under the umbrella of the Palestinian Authority in Gaza. And so, you know, it all depends on your perspective. Was the state building a success? Sure, within the narrow confines of Area A, it was a smashing success. Within the confines of a Palestinian national movement and government and national government, it was a dismal failure because of all of these exemptions. You know, Gaza is exempt, Hamas is exempt, politics, oppositional politics are exempt. And so within that narrow world that was called the peace process of allowable Palestinian politics, it was a huge success. And so that's, you know, I think that's been the fundamental problem with this process.
The gentleman up there.
So, my name is Farid. I'm Palestinian American. I'm an interpreter, and I have a mic. So, what stuck out in President Abbas's speech yesterday, and I think is very thought-provoking, is Hello. Okay. So in yesterday's speech at the Security Council, I think among the things, one of the new things, of course, he called for multilateralism. And of course, before that, we had Ambassador Hossam Zumlot here. He's speaking also about multilateralism and how this is a new way forward, and how this on a political level might serve the Palestinians in some sort of hope for forging a new peace deal. However, one thing that President Abbas said yesterday was we need protection. It was a historic speech because this was a call, a clarion call on behalf of the president of the Palestinian people in front of everybody there, including Nick Haley and Kushner, who were, from what I understand, trying to prevent his speaking. So this was a clarion call on behalf of the Palestinian president for protection by the UN so as to support a new Palestinian initiative that will work seriously on the concrete resolutions already there on behalf of the UN so as to implement these things moving forward. He's asking for protection. In your all's mind, what does that mean? Because we're talking about Hamas and the weapons, and you know, all of this is under the watchful eye of Israel and Jerusalem. Of Israel and Tel Aviv. So as long as they're controlling the show, as long as they have that oversight over Gaza and what happens in Gaza and foiling the elections like they've done before, Hamas was nothing. They brought Hamas back. And because of this, we have this vicious cycle. What do you see as something really new about yesterday's speech, as about a Palestinian initiative to move forward, leading this new round of negotiations? Thank you.
يعني إذا بسمحوا لي الإخوان.
If I may start.
أنا مش متحدث باسم يعني الرئاسة أو القيادة.
I don't speak on behalf of the leadership or the presidency.
بس أنا أحد الناشطين الشباب والفاعلين في الأراضي الفلسطينية.
But I'm an activist in Palestine.
وبقدر أحكي إنه دائما لازم الفلسطينيين يبادروا.
And I always say Palestinians should initiate.
وهاي مبادرة أنا أعتقد إنها امبارح كانت جريئة وكانت جديدة.
And I think that the initiative yesterday was bold and new.
بالإضافة إنه الحماية الدولية هي مطلب يعني مش هلا من كل مرة بنطلب احنا حماية دولية وبنطلب قوات دولية وموجود وفي تواجد لهم كان في الخليل في فترات.
In terms of international protection, we always ask for that, and at one point there was international presence in Hebron.
وأيضا في قرارات شرعية دولية كثير يعني اتخذت ولم ينفذ منها يعني ولا شيء.
And there have also been a lot of international resolutions, but they were never applied.
الشيء المهم في اللي امبارح صار إنه إحنا بلشنا نبادر فلسطينيا.
What's important about yesterday is that we started initiating as Palestinians.
واللي بحكي أنا لازم المبادرة تكون هي من القيادة كمان يلحقها من القاعدة أو من الجمهور كمان مساندة عشان تكون المبادرة إلها يعني زي ما بنحكي بالعربي والفلاح إلها دين وجرين يعني.
So it needs to be on both levels, this initiative. It needs to be on the leadership level, and then he said, like we say in colloquial Arabic, it needs to have hands and legs, meaning the Palestinian public supporting it, the base.
مهم جدا ان احنا نتمسك بهاي المبادرة.
It's very important that we hold on this initiative.
خصوصا ان هاي المبادرة يعني هي يعني صحيح ما جابت شيء جديد بس هي قدمت فلسطينيا، هذا مهم. وهي ضمن المنظومة العالمية وضمن المنظومة العربية ويعني وهي ما يعني تعتمد بأساسها على المبادرة العربية للسلام وعلى المبادرات اللي تم طرحها سابقا.
And although there's nothing new in there, what's new is that it was a Palestinian initiative, and what's also important is that it's within the international system of doing things. So it's based on the Arab Peace Initiative and based on other international initiatives and resolutions. Here, sorry.
Hi, my name is Baha Al-Dahoudi, and I'm Palestinian from the Gaza Strip. We've been talking about new things brought up to the table in terms of solutions, ways to resolve this problem. And one of the things that was brought up a couple of months ago, and no one has actually paid much attention to it, is the Palestinians themselves in the Gaza Strip have been trying to gather a mass movement that could actually cross the border between the Gaza Strip into Israel. I wouldn't say it's a border, I would say it's more of a separation fence. This movement basically is to bring more than 100,000 people in the Gaza Strip to just, in a non-violent way, to cross and pass the fence into the Israeli land, to bring more of attention to the siege in the Gaza Strip, to bring more attention to what is happening to the people in the Gaza Strip. It is something definitely unusual. It is something that we say maybe it's not expected, but there are thousands of people who are actually gathering votes and trying to gather this much people to make this movement happen. Now, my question is to the three of our guests, as civil society organizations, how can you make this movement happen? How can you help gather as many people as possible? We're talking about hundreds of thousands of people, not just 100 people or 1,000 people, hundreds of thousands of people. This is one thing. For the Arab American community, how can you help cover this movement in terms of media coverage, bring the attention of the international community to this movement? And then for the Palestinian leadership, how can they support such movement? We believe that if we don't help ourselves, no one will help us. So if the Palestinians themselves make this movement happen, how could everyone else support this movement?
Thanks for the strategic question, Bahab.
إذا بتسمحوا لي. يعني إحنا كفلسطينيين عايشين في الأراضي المحتلة
as Palestinians living in the occupied territories,
أي حركة بتصير أو أي تجمع أو أي مساعدة إحنا يعني أكيد بنرحب فيها وبنقدم لها شو بنقدر مساعد.
we welcome any movement that tries to break the status quo and try to support it as much as possible.
وأي يعني أي حركة بتقدم مقاومة لا عنفية ومقاومة بتساهم في المقاومة الشعبية الفلسطينية أكيد إحنا داعمينها وبنكون معها والفلسطينيين برحبوا فيها أكيد بصدر رحب.
And definitely we support and Palestinians welcome and support any initiative or movement that is non-violent.
وهنا هو سؤال يعني كمان هو مهم أنا بدي أضم صوتي لصوتك كيف ممكن إحنا كمؤسسات دولية كمؤسسات مجتمع مدني في الخارج كيف ممكن نقدم يد المساعدة للناس اللي بيضحوا أو بيعملوا زي هاي الحركات المهمة.
And I want to add my voice to yours here because this is a very important question and ask again and let's think of how the civil society in Palestine but also the international community elsewhere can support this movement.
لأنه هاي مثل هاي الحركات ومثل هاي المبادرات الهامة بتساعد الشعب الفلسطيني في إبقاء الأمن عنده وتعزيز صموده.
Because such very important initiatives will support the Palestinian people and will reinforce their steadfastness,
خصوصا عند أهلنا وإخواننا في قطاع غزة.
especially with our brothers in Gaza.
Do you want to go first? In a situation like this, I would obviously defer to your voices on it and say that it's actually heartening to think about. When you first posed the questions, you said, looking to the future, what can one be hopeful about? And when you talk about this issue, it's very difficult sometimes to identify those things. What you talk about and what you're talking about in terms of the work that you're doing is what I find hopeful, and that is that people subjected to occupation like this for generations to come, when he describes the situation with his daughter, when we talk about a 17-year-old sitting in a jail cell that we haven't seen since December, that's how for me, that is what drives this incredible sense of hope about what's to come and what's the potential is. As I see it, when you're talking about Arab Americans, it's to frankly get our bad U.S. policy out of the way. We are not an objective participant in this process. We have enabled the occupation. We paid for the wall. We helped pay for the wall to go up, and ideally we'll help pay for it to come down when it needs to come down. That role that we play as an enabler of this occupation is a key piece of this, and I think more Americans understand that. And it has to do with, it's not because we changed the media coverage of the issue, but rather because the way that the information now happens is different. So I'm not saying anything earth-shattering to suggest that the role of social media and the democratization of news in that way has helped this issue considerably. In my opinion, as someone who appreciates policy and truth, it hasn't helped everything, but in this particular issue, it has. So I think that's a very important piece of this as well. And the final point I would make is that just as a sort of, one of the most important things we can do is to better understand the plight of the Palestinian struggle and people, and that does mean people. So when you talk about it as hundreds of thousands, I would suggest that part of what's been most impactful is when we see one specific individual, one individual human struggle, and the ability to connect to that. That's just something Americans have not had a lot of. So in the work that we do, going back to the 90s, we actually used to do studies where we'd look at the New York Times coverage of an incident in the region and highlight the fact that this person had a name and an age, and this side of it was 23 people were killed. So the more that can be done in terms of amplifying the human stories and personalizing them, both coming out of Gaza, coming out of the West Bank, dealing with all this would be very important to break through. Because I think Americans have a disposition to this that is maybe different than the way we all perceive it in terms of headlines. Most don't care, right? I mean, it's a foreign policy issue, and there isn't a lot of space in our lives for some of those things. But when you get them to see it as an issue of social justice and human rights, there is a connection to it.
Do you have any response to that? Thank you. Over there in the corner, please.
Is this on? Yes, no? Okay. Obviously, the occupation looms over everything and embeds itself in everything. But even so, let me turn to the title of this afternoon, Envisioning Palestine. Could you please say something about the contributions of the Palestinian diaspora to economic development within the very small sphere that can even operate in. What role do the universities have? Young people who have the opportunity to leave may well decide to leave and not come back. So what can there be embedded in a tragic, heartbreaking, and awful context to give some hands-on-the-ground opportunities for people to grow and learn and see a future?
Is that for you? Sorry, who was the question for? Anybody wants to answer the question?
No, please, you first.
أنا يعني صار لي 3 أسابيع في أمريكا.
This is my third week here in the U.S.
واجتمعت مع كثير ناس يعني من لوس أنجلوس لسان فرانسيسكو لشيكاغو لدي سي ونيويورك.
And I met a lot of people from LA to San Francisco, Chicago, and here in New York.
وكان هدفي إيصال معاناة الشعب الفلسطيني تحت الاحتلال بشكل مبدئي، بالإضافة إنه الحديث شو ممكن إنه الشعب الأمريكي أو الناس الموجودين في هنا على أمريكا في أرض أمريكا إنهم شو ممكن يقدموا.
So one of my goals was to raise the voice of the Palestinians and talk about the reality on the ground, the occupation, but also I wanted to see how Americans could help us break through.
ممكن يعني كثير أشياء ممكن تنعمل من يعني بتبلش برفض الاحتلال وإعلاء صوت الناس في المجتمع الأمريكي لرفض هذا الاحتلال وإنهاء الصراع الفلسطيني الإسرائيلي.
So there are a lot of things that could be done, starting from rejecting the occupation, speaking up against that, towards ending the conflict and the occupation.
خصوصا بعد يعني قرار الرئيس ترامب في نقل السفارة.
Especially after the Trump declaration of moving the embassy.
مهم صوت المعتدلين الموجودين في أمريكا إنه يعلى أكثر.
The voice of moderates in America needs to be louder than ever.
لأنه صوتهم راح يساعدنا في إنه المعتدلين موجودين والصوت العاقل لساته موجود في الشارع الأمريكي.
Because that is going to support us and is going to send a message back home that moderates in America are still around and people who think rationally and logically are around and they support us.
بدي بذكر أنا في فترة انتخابات ترامب أوباما بس رجع الانتخابات الشعب الفلسطيني يمكن فرح أكثر ما فرح بس نجح أبو عمار ولا أبو مازن.
I remember that during the Obama elections, Palestinian people were very happy that Obama won the elections more than they were happy that Yasser Arafat won elections back in the day.
للأسف يعني 8 سنين أوباما يعني ما حرك إشي في المياه الراكدة، لكن يعني كان جبح يعني جنون الناس المتطرفين في الحكومة الإسرائيلية.
During the 8 years, Obama did not basically move the quiet waters, didn't do something significant.
عشان هيك مهم جدا ان احنا نسمع صوت الناس المعتدلين احنا بفلسطين.
That's why I'm saying it's very important for us to raise the voice of moderates here.
عشان يعني احيانا ما نخلط يعني الاصوات النشاز مع الاصوات الجميله او المعتدله او الناس اللي بتحب السلام وبتحب انهاء الاحتلال.
So we don't confuse the voice of a minority for the voice of a majority.
بالإضافة طبعا للدعم المادي وللدعم يعني الحركات الوطنية أو المقاومة الشعبية من خلال يعني كثير وسائل وكثير طرق.
And also through support, financial and otherwise, for all the movements that are working in Palestine.
بالإضافة أنا ممكن يعني السوشيال ميديا والفيسبوك وهالأمور هالأيام سهلة، ويعني إيصال صوتكم بصدقوني راح يفرق وراح يكون هو يعطي حافز للناس الموجودة في شرق فلسطين.
Social media has been like transformational in changing our experience, and it has become very easy. And now people here could raise their voice and talk to people on the street in Palestine.
Thank you.
May I add something real quick to that point? And I don't say this to be glib about this at all, so I hope it doesn't come off that way. But whether we're talking about state building projects or we're talking about economic development or all of the different things that we've been able to do or attempt to do, I think it's critical that we understand in the context that it's in. And and so I always have a hard time having these conversations about what happened in the 90s and the influx of development that took place post-Oslo, and why didn't it materialize into more? Well, because you live under occupation, because another entity controls those borders, and materials were held up. And I would argue until, Abdullah's 5.5-year-old daughter isn't going through multiple checkpoints to get to where she needs to get, that whole conversation doesn't really play out the way it needs to. So I think that's a small but important point of it.
Yeah. Corner again.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. Deborah Shushan of Americans for Peace Now. I want to give some love to Maya. Thank you so much for mentioning my organization, and that we are in many ways kindred spirits. I appreciate you also mentioning that AIPAC is not the only voice in town when it comes to the American Jewish community. Far from it, especially when you look at the public opinion among American Jews who are progressive, and many of whom very much want to see a just end to this conflict. So much love to you for that, Maya. I appreciate it. My question is in the main for Abdallah, but ahlan wa sahlan if Maya and Khaled would also like to weigh in. My question has to do, Abdallah, with your comment that you feel it's important to reach out to and try to change the opinion of the Israeli street. And I want to reference, I know some of you were there yesterday. I had a discussion with Akiva Eldar in this very space, an Israeli journalist who has written a lot and talked yesterday about the annexation mindset and developments that are occurring within Israel in terms of move toward annexation. And Akiva spoke very strongly about this mindset that the right-wing government, which you spoke of it being a settler-led government, and you're not wrong, has made in allowing this annexationist mindset to take shape, even when a silent majority of Israelis don't prefer annexation, they also don't see a price tag. So they don't do anything to oppose it. So my question to you is, how do you reach out? How do you transform Israeli public opinion? And to what extent do you see a role for working with organizations like, for example, my sister organization in Israel, Peace Now? Thank you so much.
شكرا. Thank you. هذا يعني في صدد احنا إعادة التفكير فيه والعمل فيه، واحنا اشتغلنا بهذا الحكي كثير مؤسسات وكثير ناس وكثير أشخاص قياديين ومؤسسات المجتمع المدني اشتغلوا بهذا الموضوع.
So this is something that we've been thinking about, and we're thinking of reviving, and we've done this work before, and many other civil society organizations have done it.
أنا بذكر بال91 وال90 مشان عملية تحضير للمفاوضات كان في عمليات يعني مكوكية من قبل بعض الفلسطينيين، وعملوا زيارات من بيت لبيت مشان يشرحوا عن حل الدولتين وعن أوسلو وتسويقه عند المجتمع الإسرائيلي.
And in 91, I remember those attempts by Palestinians in preparation for Oslo, where they would go from door to door and talk to the Israelis to prepare the ground for Oslo.
المجتمع الإسرائيلي الآن مختلف، بيهتم بأموره الاقتصادية وسيارته وبيته أكثر ما بيهتم في الاحتلال والصراع وهاي الأمور.
The Israeli society is different now. They care about economics, they care about their daily life, their house, their car, more than they care about the occupation.
مهم جدا احنا دورنا كمؤسسات مجتمع مدني، كحركات بتشتغل على السلام وعلى انهاء الصراع، ان احنا نرجع نذكر هاي الناس انه لكم دور ولازم صوتكم يعلى.
It's very important for us as civil society organizations and other parties to go back and remind those people that you have a voice and you need to raise it.
في بعض الجمهور الإسرائيلي مش دار إنه في عنده إنه هو حكومته محتلة فلسطين.
Some Israelis have no idea that their government occupies Palestinians.
ما عندوش فكرة شو بصير في الأراضي الوطنية الفلسطينية إطلاقا.
They have absolutely no idea what's going on in Palestinian land.
يعني قبل 3 أشهر كنت في تل أبيب أزور صديق اسمه تال هارس، بيشتغل هو ناشط في إنهاء الصراع. وانا مروح التقيت في يعني رحت اشتري شيء لبنتي، الصبيه بتقول لي وين راجع، بقول لها على فلسطين، بتحكي لي طالع من المطار، وده يعني اذا بتخلي المصاري تب عندي هنا يعني مشان اذا مسافر على بلدكم.
So a few months ago he was visiting a friend in Tel Aviv. In Tel Aviv, and on his way back he grabbed something for his daughter from somewhere, from a market. And the lady at the cashier was like, how are you going back to Palestine? You take which airport are you using? And do you want to leave the currency since you're not going to need it anymore as tip?
المجتمع الإسرائيلي إذا ما كانش جندي وأجى على الضفة الغربية أو راح على حدود قطاع غزة وشارك في الحصار بقطاع غزة بيعرفش إنه في صراع.
So Israeli soldiers who do not serve in the West Bank or serve in Gaza or the sieges do not know that there's a conflict.
أو يكون طبعا مستوطن وهذا يعني
Or if they're a settler, but otherwise they don't know.
أنا اليوم يعني كنت في حديث مع أصدقائي لي هنا في واشنطن، كنا نحكي قديش ممكن نشتغل من خلال بعض الحركات الوطنية واعتمادا على المبادرة الفلسطينية. هاي مش مبادرة أبو مازن، هاي مبادرة الشعب الفلسطيني راح تكون ولازم تكون مبادرة الشعب الفلسطيني.
Today I was talking to some friends here in Washington of how we can revive this and how we can work on the Palestinian initiative. And this is not initiative of Abu Mazen or President Abbas. It's the initiative of the Palestinian people.
وكيف ممكن الحركات الوطنية الفلسطينية إنهم يساهموا في إيصالها للشعب الإسرائيلي، ومش نحن ما بدناش نوصل رسالة سلام ومحبة وناكل حمص وناكل فلافل، لا، احنا بدنا نوصل رسالة إنهاء صراع وإنهاء احتلال، وإنه نعيش بدولتين بحد بعض باحترام، وممكن بعدها نعمل كل أشكال السلام اللي يعني بيعتمد على الشنجل أو بيعتمد على الكونفدرالية واتيفر، يعني ممكن الواحد يصنع في المستقبل. بس إحنا مهم جدا إن إحنا ننهي هذا الوضع اللي صار له أكثر من 70 سنة.
So we were also talking about engaging our national movements, the political parties, in this outreach because it's in the Palestinian national interest. And what we're talking about in terms of outreach is not, so there's no direct translation, but kind of, it's not the lovey-dovey stuff. It's not like, let's get together and eat hummus and falafel and that's it. No, it's political. And eventually, we want to arrive at a two-state solution for two people where people can live in respect. And afterwards, maybe we can create a confederacy or like a Schengen system like Europe or however.
أنا بيت أهلي في جنين.
My family house is in Jenin.
وأنا عايش في رام الله.
And I live in Ramallah.
بس تطلعي من جنين لرام الله وتشوفي حجم المستوطنات، ونسايبي من الخليل يعني مراتي من الخليل.
And my in-laws are from
حجم المستوطنات الموجودة بدهم يخلقوا، قاعدين الحكومة الإسرائيلية هاي المتطرفة قاعدين بيخلقوا حقائق وضاربين يعني للحيط، فاهم، كل القرارات الشرعية الدولية وكل كل يعني اي حدا فاهم بيرفض هذا، يعني بيرفض المستوطنات وبيرفض تجميدها.
So basically, if you go from Jenin if you go from Jenin to Ramallah or to Hebron, the size of and the amount of settlements is unimaginable. And then what the Israeli government is trying to do is create facts on the ground. شو آخر شيء قلته؟ بعد حقائق على الأرض. بتخلق حقائق على الأرض.
وبخلق ودعم للمستوطنين على في الضفة الغربية.
And they're in constant and continuous support for the settler movement in the West Bank.
سوري يعني بس المضحك المبكي انه بيطلع لك نتنياهو بيحكي انا مع حل الدولتين، ما بتعرفيش كيف طبعا.
Like what's sad and laughable is that Netanyahu then comes out and says I'm with the two-state solution. Gentleman over here, sorry. Yeah, you, please. It's coming. It's coming, it's there.
What about the issue of one state or two states? And I'm not only interested, not mainly interested in the speaker's opinion, though I'd be happy to hear it, but to the extent that you know what the view of most Palestinians is.
ولا قصة حل الدولة أو حل الدولتين مش بس من رأيكم بس كمان شو بفكروا الشعب الفلسطيني. I may answer this question actually.
لا أنا كان بس أنا حابب أسأل خالد أو ما حابين يحكوا إيش عن هذا الموضوع لأن هذا الموضوع أعتقد إنه مهم يعني.
I would just point out that politically, those of us who've been in the two-state camp for a long time now appear to be delusional in a way that's, I think, very challenging. So I would only comment on the politics of it. I would defer to a Palestinian colleague to speak in terms of the people's sense of where things are. And you know, the other thing I would add just real briefly is Trump's decision of December 6th, right, on Jerusalem, and this goes to Deborah's question and your comments as well. It's not even subtle annexation anymore, right? There's a decision made in Israel on February 6th of earlier that year that made it quite clear, and that was passed by the Knesset. So to talk about two states anymore, like I said, it's politically challenging. It's inconsistent with the facts as they are today, and that's a problem, I think.
I would just broaden the scope just a little bit and say, I mean, the two-state solution has always been, I think, the preferred option diplomatically, going back, you know, to 1937 even, because it's logical. If two national groups competing over the same piece of land, well, you just, you know, the Solomonic remedy is to divide it. And for a moment, in the 1990s and up until maybe the mid-2000s, there was a solid, I would say, fairly strong political consensus around two states, and that's the most important thing. It's not, you know, public opinion is important, but what really matters, I think, is a political consensus on all three sides. The American, the Israeli, and the Palestinian, and of course the rest of the world was happy to buy into whatever they all wanted. Since then, I think we've seen a collapse of that political consensus, including here in the United States. And I think the Trump phenomenon, the Trump declaration, is a reflection of that. Trump comes from a political party that has excised any mention of the two-state solution from its party platform. And I believe them when they say that. And they talk about the alleged occupation. They talk about occupation is basically a libel. It doesn't exist. And so you have constituencies in the United States, certainly in Israel, who are way beyond, already beyond a two-state solution. And that consensus is also collapsing among Palestinians. I think the problem is that there isn't automatically a consensus emerging around a one-state option. Of course, there are different visions of what one state would look like, but let's assume the best-case scenario, one in which everyone has equal rights. You know, there's a lot of support for it on the Palestinian side, maybe at a grassroots level, especially in the diaspora. Minimal support on the Israeli side. Americans, maybe if you ask them in the abstract, so they like the idea, of course. Who would object to one person, one vote, egalitarianism? But there isn't a political consensus, so there isn't a viable political movement advocating for one state, not even on the Palestinian side. So until there is, then we're going to be stuck, I think, in this reality of neither one state nor two. It may take a generation for alternatives to two states to sort of politically mature, but we're not at that point yet.
إذا حبس الدولة الوحدة أنا بدي أجاوبك جواب يعني شعبوي يعني من الشارع بديش جواب.
I'm going to give you an answer from the street.
حل الدولة الوحدة هو يعني في المفهوم العام حلو بجنن يعني زي المدينة الفاضلة.
The one-state solution is amazing. It's like utopia.
بس هذا يعني مش على الكوكب الأرض يعني.
But not here on Earth.
احنا بنحكي عن ناس مختلفين يعني ثقافتهم مختلفة، دياناتهم مختلفة، اهتماماتهم مختلفة،
اجتماعيين. Two different religions and interests.
يعني يمكن احنا يعني في كثير ناس بيحترموا الآخر بغض النظر مين هو، بس هي في هاي الاختلافات هي موجودة.
Of course, there's respect also, but then the difference is there.
حل الدولتين هو حل الواقعي اللي احنا يعني سعينا له وقررنا من سنة 88.
The two-state solution is the realistic solution that we've adopted since 88.
وأي حلول تطرح هي تطرح من أجل هز القرار الوطني الفلسطيني أنا برأيي.
From my perspective, new like talk about other resolutions is basically to shake the Palestinian consensus.
بدنا نعمل دولتنا على أراضي 67.
We will establish our state on the 1967 borders.
وبدنا يكون عندنا حدودنا وعلمنا وعاصمتنا.
And we would like to have our borders, our flag, and our capital.
وبس تكون عندنا دولتنا ويكون عندنا شكلنا الفلسطيني اللي يعني زينا زي باقي العالم.
Then once that Palestinian identity is formed, like any other people around the world,
ممكن احنا كمستقبل نفكر بأي شيء.
We could think about anything for the future then.
لكن مهم جدا أنا بنتي تعيش في دولة فلسطينية 100%.
But it's very important for me that my daughter lives in a 100% Palestinian state.
شكرا.
Hi, am I on? Yes. Hi, I'm Stephen Stern. Thinking about Palestinian civil society, initiatives for the future, and the Abbas speech, I sense, at least from me, some distance between Khaled's prescription that getting one's own house in order first, that there is fragmentation, there is political collapse and disunity, and that needs to be addressed as there's no one more than Palestinian civil society that in terms of the disunity is upset by it. And Abdallah's prescription that getting behind the initiative of Abbas, which apparently Khaled sees nothing new in terms of multilateralism, is perhaps a proper role for civil society. Can you meld the two in terms of civil society action that deals with disunity, that deals with building trust and doing things among Palestinians to better conditions and put pressure on their leaders, and also supporting international initiatives? How do these two go together?
Thank you. احنا فلسطينيا يعني كمؤسسات مجتمع مدني يعني كناشطين الكل يعني بيشتغل على انهاء الانقسام وتوحيد كلمة الشعب الفلسطيني.
As Palestinian civil society organizations and activists on the ground, we're very engaged in the work towards ending the division.
لكن يعني بعد غزة عن الضفة، هاي البعد الجغرافي بيأثر على عدم يعني استكمال القرار بشكل رئيسي، بالإضافة إلى استحكام بعض المتشددين في القرار إنهاء الانقسام في الجهتين. خلينا نحكي.
The geographical distance and the split between Gaza and the West Bank, in addition to that, the fact that some extremists are involved in it, it makes it much more difficult to get to unity.
لكن هذا بمنعش احنا ان نشتغل على الخطين بهمة وباستمرارية.
But that doesn't mean that we should not work on both things in parallel with determination.
وانا بدي ارجع اكد انه امبارح الخطه اللي انعرضت او المبادره الفلسطينيه انعرضت، هي انعرضت باسم الشعب الفلسطيني مش باسم ابو مازن.
And again, yesterday's initiative is an initiative of the Palestinian people, not of Abu Mazen.
وانا مش جاي اسوق لها، يعني امبارح انا سمعت فيها زيكم.
I heard about it exactly like you.
بس لانها هي مقبوله دوليا ومقبوله عربيا.
But because it's accepted internationally and among Arabs.
مقبوله الى حد ما فلسطينيا.
And to a certain extent in Palestine.
لازم نشتغل عليها بشكل جدي، إن نفهم الناس عليها بداخل الشعب الفلسطيني، إنه الشباب الفلسطيني يكون يتمكن منها ويسعى إلى تطبيقها من خلال الضغط على الجانب الإسرائيلي، من خلال بناء شراكات إسرائيلية فلسطينية، من خلال الحشد الدولي، من خلال الإجماع الوطني الفلسطيني على هاي المبادرة.
We need to work on it and make sure that it's adopted and also the Palestinian public understand what it is, and from there work on it with the Palestinians and deliver it to the Israeli public and internationally move forward from there. So thank you all for coming here today. The one last thing that I want to end with is that we wanted this is a tough event, I think, from my perspective. I go to a lot of events in Washington, and I think we've been asking very important and very difficult questions. And that's because we're looking forward. We're hoping that this event is going to kick off this important journey towards having a Palestinian comprehensive strategy forward. Thanks everyone for coming, and thanks for the panelists.